Hello, everyone. Now, after we watch the Things Fall Apart of Chinua Achebe, now we're going to delve into the application and also the introduction of key concepts of Edward Said. Now, Edward Said's key concept in post-colonial criticism help us understand how the West often viewed the East or colonized people as weak, different, and uncivilized. No? He explained how the colonizer used books, language, and stories to show themselves as better. Now, these ideas will help us see how colonialism affected the people's identity, culture, and voice. Now, here's Edward Said's post-colonial criticism. Key concepts are. Now, number one is Orientalism as a discourse. Said defines Orientalism as a Western-created system of knowledge that portrays the East or non-Western societies as exotic, inferior, and in need of Western intervention. He argues that literature, art, and academic studies have historically reinforced colonial ideologies, presenting the colonized world as irrational and uncivilized. Now, the application of this to the story is Said's theory explains that colonialism isn't just about military control. It's about controlling the knowledge and language in Things Fall Apart. We see this. Number one is the Christian missionaries imposing Western religion and calling Igbo customs as barbaric. And then number two is the British legal system replacing the indigenous governance, stripping Igbo leaders of power. Now, Achebe's use of English infused with Igbo proverbs and words showing cultural resistance. Now, to the post-colonial connection of this is Achebe, like Said, shows how colonial discourse erases native voices by using the English while preserving Igbo expressions. Achebe now subverts the colonizer's language and reclaims African storytelling. Now we are in the othering process. Now Said explains that colonizers define themselves as superior by constructing the colonized as the other. This means that Eastern societies are often depicted as primitive, backward, or opposite to the West progress that about their rationality, and the chaotic and in need of control. Now they justify the colonial intervention of the Western colonial power. Now, they also said that lacking history or civilization, ignoring the indigenous knowledge and tradition. Now, how to apply this, the othering process? Said's concept of othering is when the West defines itself by portraying the East as its opposite, irrational. Now, savage and needing Western control. In Things Fall Apart now, is the British colonial officials, we see they view the Igbo tradition as strange and inferior. And the district commissioners also book title at the end is The Pacification of the Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger, shows how the British erased the African history and reduced an entire civilization to a footnote. Now, the novel also exposes how European discourse distorts African identity. Now, to the post-colonial connection, Achebe reveals the dangers of colonial narratives. The West rewrites their history to justify the oppression, much like Said described in Orientalism. And then number three, the representation and power. According to Said, colonial discourse is a tool of power by controlling how non-Western societies are represented. The West reinforces its dominance. Now Said critiques how European literature often portrays colonized people as voiceless and dependent on Western guidance. Now, how to apply this in the story? One of Said's most powerful arguments is that colonialism psychologically disempowers the colonized. Things Fall Apart illustrates this through Apollo's tragic downfall. Now, we know that Okonkwo's resist to colonial rule, but his people slowly embrace the new system. Now he cannot adapt to the cultural shifts brought by this British. His suicide now represents the disruption of Igbo identity under colonial rule. Now to the post-colonial connection again, Said explains that colonization strips people of their self-worth and agency. Now Okonkwo's death symbolizes the collapse of indigenous identity under Western domination. And also, we won't forget about the textual, number 4, textual attitude and language. Now, Said introduces this term textual attitude, where colonizers rely on stereotypical text rather than real interaction with the people. Now, they rule. He also agrees that language is a key tool of colonial power by imposing their own language. And narratives, colonizers erase indigenous voices. Now we can see this also in Philippines, how the Spanish colonial rule strips down the Tagalog and wants to teach the Filipino about Spanish, their language. Di ba alam natin na they also want to be the Spanish to be the national language of the Philippines. Yeah. Now that's how powerful actually the textual attitude and language to the post-colonial criticism. Now how to apply this, no? The textual attitude and language depicted Africa as a dark, primitive land without history or civilization. No? That's how powerful the textual attitude is, how they portray the Africa as dark. No? Now, Said critiques how Western texts often present the East as exotic, as I said, uncultured, and incapable of self-rule. Now, this story shows that Achebe counters this stereotype by portraying a complex Igbo society with governance. Now, before the British come, the colonial power come, they have governance, religion, and rich tradition. Unlike Conrad's silent, faceless Africans, Achebe gives Igbo characters that agency and their own voice. Now, the novel rejects this idea that African societies were waiting for European civilization. Now, again, to the post-colonial connection is, Said would argue that Achebe is writing back against the colonial discourse, reclaiming African history and identity. Actually, we share the same history about the African, how we experience, also our ancestors experience the colonial power of Spain, and also how the Western occupied the Africa for long years, stealing their resources, killing a bunch of people in Africa, and also the introduction of slavery. Now, this time, we reflect and also appreciate what our ancestors did for us. And that's it. Now, thank you so much for listening and watching this rich learner experience with me. Yes, thank you. Bye.